عزیزان من، آپ کو آپ کے بھائی عادل راجہ کا سلام پہنچے. میں آپ کو خوش آمدید کہتا ہوں. سولجر سپیکس کے اوپر لائیو سیشن ہے, ملٹیپل پلیٹ فارمز کے اوپر آپ مجھے دیکھ رہے ہیں, اور آج ایک خصوصی مہمان ہمیں جوائن کریں گے. امریکہ کی فورن پالیسی کے ایکسپرٹ ایرک سپرلنگ ہمیں جوائن کریں گے امریکہ سے. آج 25 اپریل 2026 ہے. آپ جس بھی پلیٹ فارم پہ ہمیں دیکھ رہے ہیں, آپ کو بہت بہت جو ہے وہ خوش آمدید. ایک جو ہے نئے ممبر نے ہمیں جوائن کیا ہے, ان کو بھی بہت بہت خوش آمدید ہے, احمد اعجاز کو. عزیزان من, جو سچویشن ہے وہ بالکل ہو بہو وہی ہو رہا ہے جس طرح آپ کو بتایا تھا. آپ کو بتایا تھا کہ پاکستان کی جو رجیم ہے اس وقت, جو پاکستان کا فیورٹ فیلڈ مارشل بنا ہوا ہے, اس کے اوپر نہ تو ایران اعتبار کرتا ہے, حالانکہ وہ خود کو ایران کا داماد کہتا ہے, لیکن ایران بھی ان کے اوپر اعتماد نہیں کرتا, ایرانی بھی اس کے اوپر اعتماد نہیں کرتے. وہ سمجھتے ہیں کہ وہ ٹرمپ کا خادم ہے اور شہباز شریف آگے اس کا نوکر ہے, اور یہ ٹرمپ کا فیورٹ فیلڈ مارشل ہے, ظاہری بات ہے, تو اس پہ کیوں وہ اعتبار کریں گے, لیکن پاکستانیوں کے اوپر وہ اعتبار کرتے ہیں. اور دوسری طرف ٹرمپ کو بھی جو ہے وہ فیورٹ فیلڈ مارشل کے اوپر اعتبار نہیں کرتا. اس کے ثبوت کیا ہیں وہ ہم آپ کے سامنے اب کچھ دیر کے اندر رکھنے جا رہے ہیں. آج کا بڑا انٹرسٹنگ ویلاگ اس میں بھی ہوگا کہ ایرک سپرلنگ ظاہری بات ہے امریکی ہیں, وہ انگریزی میں ہی بات کریں گے, لیکن میں آپ کو ساتھ ساتھ ٹرانسلیٹ کر کے ترجمہ جو ہے وہ بتاتا رہوں گا, اور جو بھی سوال کروں گا وہ آپ کو بتا کے ہماری زبان کے اندر آپ کو بتاؤں گا, پھر ان سے سوال کروں گا. اور جو بھی آپ لوگ یہاں پہ کمنٹس کے اندر سوال لکھیں گے وہ بھی میں ان کے ساتھ کروں گا, ہماری زبان میں کروں گا, اور جو بھی جواب دیں گے اس کا ترجمہ میں ہو بہو, ہو سکتا ہے لفظ بلفظ تو نہ بتا سکوں, لیکن اس کا جو مجموعہ ہے, جو کرکس ہے, وہ میں آپ کو یہیں پہ بتا دوں گا. اور ایرک سپرلنگ نے ہو بہو یہی چیز 2 دن پہلے میرے انٹرویو میں میرے ساتھ کہی تھی کہ عاصم منیر کے اوپر اعتبار امریکہ میں نہیں کیا جا رہا. اور کل جب ایران کے وزیر خارجہ آئے پاکستان, تو میں نے اس بات کے اوپر جب یہ سامنے رکھی بات کہ بھائی ایران کے وزیر خارجہ جو ہیں وہ ٹھیک ہے آ تو گئے ہیں, لیکن وہ امریکی وفد سے جو امریکہ کا میں صدر ٹرمپ کا داماد آ رہا ہے, یہ ایران کا تو زبردستی کا داماد بنا ہوا ہے نا منیرہ مستری, جو صدر ٹرمپ کا ایکچول داماد ہے جیرڈ کشنر, وہ آ رہا ہے, لیکن اس سے ملاقات نہیں یہ کریں گے, اس سے پہلے چلے جائیں گے. اور یہ بات ایران سے بار بار گراؤنڈ پہ جو رپورٹرز گئے ہوئے ہیں وہ لوگ بھی یہی بات کر رہے تھے, اور پروفیسر مراندی نے بھی یہی بات کی. ہماری ایک یو کے جرنلسٹ ہے بشرا شیخ, وہ باقاعدہ لندن سے ٹریول کر کے اس وقت ایران میں موجود ہیں, انہوں نے بھی یہی وہاں سے رپورٹنگ کی تھی. اور میں نے آپ کو یہ بات بتائی تھی کہ ایرانی اس وقت عاصم منیر پر اعتبار نہیں کرتے. پاکستان کی فوجی اسٹیبلشمنٹ نے تل کا زور لگایا, جتنا ان کے اندر زور تھا, کہ کسی طرح ایران کے وزیر خارجہ کو روک کے رکھیں. درمیان میں یہ بھی بات انہوں نے کروائی کہ اس کے ہوٹل کے اندر بند کر دو, اس کو کھولو ہی نہ, اس کو ڈک لو. مطلب جس طرح یہ سمجھ رہے تھے کہ جس طرح عمران خان کے چاہنے والوں کو یہ ڈک لیتے ہیں, یا اوورسیز پاکستانی جب پاکستان جاتے ہیں اور اگر عمران خان کو سپورٹ کرتے ہیں تو ان کو ڈک لیتے ہیں, یا ان کے گھر والوں کو یہ ڈک لیتے ہیں, ڈک کا مطلب ہوتا ہے قید کر لیتے ہیں, اسی طرح یہ ایران کے وزیر خارجہ کو قید کر لیں گے, ان کے مزائل لائیں گے یہاں پہ, جدھر آپ مار کے تو دیکھیں نا, جی ایچ کیو بھی ان کے نشانے کے اوپر ہے, آپ کیا کر لیں گے. لیکن بہرحال یہ ایک سینیریو ہے, ہائپوتھیٹیکل, جو میٹافوریکل بات چیت تو نہیں ہے لیکن ہائپوتھیٹیکل ضرور ہے. اب اس سچویشن کے اندر انہوں نے یہ بالکل کلیئر کر دیا, بڑی کوشش کی گئی کہ سٹیو وٹکوف صدر ٹرمپ کے دوست اور ان کے داماد جیرڈ کشنر سے ملاقات کروا دی جائے, رک جائیں. اراغچی صاحب جو ہیں وزیر خارجہ ایران کے, انہوں نے کہا نہیں بھائی, اس چیز کی مجھے پیچھے سے اجازت نہیں ہے, بات کہیں اور ہوگی, کیونکہ تمہارے اوپر ہمیں اعتبار نہیں ہے. تم امریکہ کے ٹٹو بن کے یہاں پہ اپنی فوج کی تنخواہیں بڑھا کے, فوج کو کھسی کر کے ہمارے اپنے ملک پہ تو مسلط ہو سکتے ہو, لیکن ہم لوگوں کی ایک بہت بڑی جو ہے وہ خودداری کی داستان جو ہے وہ کئی صدیوں کے اوپر محیط ہے, وہ ہم کسی ایک جرنیل کے ہاتھوں اپنی عزت نیلام نہیں کر سکتے. یہ بات چیت اندر کھاتے ہوئی ہے. انٹرنیشنل جتنے بھی یہاں پہ لوگ ہیں, ڈپلومیٹس ہیں, وہ بڑا کھل کے یہی بات کر رہے ہیں. وہ کہتے ہیں کہ یار اگر تو واقعی پاکستان کی نیت صاف, پاکستان کے مطلب یہ ہے کہ عاصم منیر کی, منیر مستری کی اور شوباز شریف کی نیت چیری بلاسم کی صاف ہوتی, تو وہ یار اتنا بڑا ڈرامہ نہ کرتے, ڈھنڈورا نہ پیٹتے کہ ہم گلوبل پیس میکر ہیں اور ہمیں نوبل پرائز مل رہا ہے, اور وہ لیکس نہ کرتے, स्टोरियां लीक कर रहे हैं, कभी न्यूयॉर्क टाइम को, कभी रॉयटर्स को, कभी बीबीसी को, कि जनाब ये हो गया, ये हो गया, ये होने वाला है, बस सौदा मुक गया है। ये हरकतें नहीं की जाती, ये सिर्फ और सिर्फ डेस्परेशन वाज़े तौर के ऊपर जीएचक्यू रावलपिंडी की, आसिम मुनीर की नजर आ रही है, जो तनख्वाहें तो 100%, 200%, 300% बढ़ा रहा है, लेकिन मईशत उसके कंट्रोल के अंदर सिरे से है ही नहीं। और अगर मईशत उसके कंट्रोल के अंदर, इकोनॉमी उसके कंट्रोल में नहीं है, तो कब तक उधार के ऊपर ये इस फौज को तनख्वाहें देगा, इस कौम की गर्दन के, इस कौम का खून नचोड़ के? सवाल तो सीधा सा उठता है। कल तक हम लोगों की पाकिस्तान से बाहर हर जगह इज्जत होती थी फौज के नाते से, आज उसी नाते से इज्जत की जगह जो है वो बेइज्जती हो रही है। तो अजीजा नेमन, ये इस वक्त यहां पे सिचुएशन है, एंड आई वुड लाइक टू वेलकम एरिक स्पर्लिंग, हु हैज जॉइंड अस। ही इज एग्जीक्यूटिव डायरेक्टर ऑफ जस्ट फॉरेन पॉलिसी. Eric, we will welcome you, and it is going to be a bilingual program in which I will, translate the crux of whatsoever you are saying, and I would also, request you to, bear with me, because I would be, managing this program in 2 to 3 different languages, so that the wider audience, almost in South Asia, they understand what we are talking about. तो एरिक से हम सबसे पहले तो ये पूछेंगे कि ये जो ड्रामा ग्लोबल पीस मेकर का कर रहे थे, और अब सदर ट्रंप ने ऐलान कर दिया है कि जनाब मेरा दामाद नहीं आएगा, वो क्या सीन है? एरिक, इट्स अ वेरी सरप्राइजिंग स्टेटमेंट कमिंग इन. Fox News just announced this, that President Trump has personally cancelled the plan of his son-in-law Jared Kushner and his best friend, I would say, Steve Witkoff. Here's the news. Here's the news, which is breaking news, which is coming forward.
A Fox News exclusive. President Trump just told our own Aisha Hasmi he has canceled his envoy's trip to Pakistan to hold talks with Iran. Aisha Hasmi, I've told my people a little while ago they were getting ready to leave, and I said, nope, you're not going to make an 18-hour flight to go there. We have all the cards. They can call us anytime they want, but you're not going to be making any more 18-hour flights to sit around and talk about nothing. Now, this is significant. It came after the trip earlier in the week where we thought the Vice President J.D. Vance would be going to hold talks was scuttled. So that is breaking news from our own Aisha Hasni. And Alex Hogan is live from the White House with the exclusive details. Alex.
Hi, Aisha. So major shakeup to the negotiations that we did expect to see take place today. And this once again shows how delicate these negotiations are, despite the broad international efforts to get everyone to the table at the last hour. Just like this morning, everything can simply fall through. So what we did expect to see, we were waiting to see Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, the U.S. envoys, were going to be leading that delegation today in Pakistan. President Donald Trump, as you mentioned, just telling Fox News' Aisha Hasni today that he has canceled that trip. It comes amid the news that Iran's foreign minister has already left Pakistan. President Trump once again saying that there's no point sending them on an 18-hour flight and that Iran can call at any time.
Well, this is a big blow for the Pakistani dictator Asim Munir and the Pakistani illegitimate Pakistani regime. अजीजा नेमन, मैं एरिक से पूछ रहा हूं कि ये तो इन्होंने जो बताया था अमन की फाख्ता उड़ाने जा रहे हैं, तो ये तो सदर ट्रंप ने ठोक दिया इनकी सारी की सारी फाख्ताओं को इकट्ठा ही. What do you think, Eric? Is it not a big blow for the so-called peacemaker, the illegitimate regime looking for legitimacy through labeling themselves as global peacemakers in Pakistan? What do you think? What is your analysis? So, Eric, we can't hear you. I think you're.
This is what many of us were expecting. Sorry about that. I think actually the Pakistani diaspora and people in the country, were some of the people who were most aware of this. Many of most people around the world. It's one of the dynamics we've dealt with in the U.S. is there's very little awareness of the 5th biggest country in the world, which is just a broader problem, which we can discuss. It's very troubling, But because of this, there were only a limited number of analysts who were even aware of what the role this regime would be playing here, what their incentives were. And so this was a major problem we had in the U.S. media, where journalists, have sort of this very simplistic and kind of fictionalized vision of what Pakistan's current regime is like. But all that to say is, yes, I mean, I think, we saw, those of us who were tracking it, we saw this, what they were trying to do. They were desperate to keep it alive. They were desperate to do leaks to make it appear alive. But ultimately, these type of negotiations, they are actually difficult because you do have parties that have really incompatible views. And it does take, I forget which of the analysts, I think maybe it was Ali Vayez, I think, or Vali Nasser, I can't remember, but one of them had said, you do need creative approaches here. I mean, it's not just bringing the parties together, hosting them on the tarmac. That's obviously the part the regime liked the most, is that, that's why they, Raghchi arrived yesterday and they tried to make it into the biggest event, possible on the tarmac there. But yeah, so it's, they're going to be disappointed. And, of course, this is going to be, now, Pakistan's regime has been on, is on the agenda. People are aware of it. All the international media has said Field Marshal Asim Munir, the most powerful man in the country. So I think in the end, it's going to be a net negative for them because the idea of the hybrid regime is pretty much dead. People are aware it's a dictatorship run by this field marshal, which is a strange term that no one else in the civilized world uses. So I think, it's a big loss all around, and I'm sure they're going to scramble to try to salvage it. But I don't think Iran is going to want them as a mediator again, is my guess.
तो एरिक स्पर्लिंग कह रहे हैं कि अब ईरान नहीं चाहता कि पाकिस्तान का जो फील्ड मार्शल है, और बड़ा ये वो कह रहे हैं कि मजाहिया किस्म का ये बातचीत है और सिविलाइज्ड दुनिया के अंदर इस तरह की बातचीत नहीं होती। हालांकि अगला मैं उनसे पूछूंगा कि उनका अपना सदर जो है, अमेरिका का सदर ने उसको फेवरेट फील्ड मार्शल बोला हुआ है, लेकिन बहरहाल सदर ट्रंप के इस ऐलान के बाद जो है वो उनकी पोजीशन बहुत शदीद मशकूक हो गई है और फेलियर उनके सामने है। Tonight we are looking at a very critical question, but before we come to the question, Eric, your own president calls him the favorite field marshal. Why do you think Trump calls him the favorite field marshal? Trump ने favorite field marshal क्यों बनाया हुआ है इसको, sir? Please.
Well, the first reason is because he doesn't really know his name. That's the first reason. I mean, if anyone has seen Trump say his name,
एरिक कह रहे हैं कि फेवरेट फील्ड मार्शल इसलिए क्योंकि उसको आसिम मुनीर का नाम बोलना नहीं आता, इसलिए उसने फेवरेट फील्ड मार्शल बना दिया। That's the first, Eric. All right, go on, please carry on.
No, but it sounds funny, but that's my genuine analysis. If anyone has seen a clip of him saying his name, please share it. You could share it under, wherever this is posted. I've been looking for it. So if anyone else has seen it, I believe he doesn't know his name. And so, in Field Marshal, it's easy to remember it. It plays into Trump's own fantasy. Obviously, everyone knows Trump does he's talked, about Xi and about Kim Jong-un and, the level of attention. So he likes the dictator idea. So I think, that plays into it. He likes the title. So, I'm sure if Trump could, he wouldn't mind giving himself that title. So I think that's partially why, but also
that's great.
Speaks to how Rubio has built that relationship.
I agree. एरिक कह रहे हैं कि भाई आपके फील्ड मार्शल का नाम ट्रंप को नहीं आता, इसलिए उसने जो है, और फील्ड मार्शल उसको जरा अच्छा लगता है बोलना, तो अगर उसको मौका मिलता तो खुद भी बन जाता, तो इसलिए उसको फेवरेट फील्ड मार्शल कहता है और कोई वजह नहीं है, इसका नाम नहीं आता। But tonight we are looking at a very critical question. The Iran war peace talks actually, are they happening or not? And are they being played by competing narratives? Because what we are seeing publicly and what's happening behind the scenes may be two different things. आज का सबसे बड़ा सवाल ये है कि क्या ईरान की जो जंग है उसके मुतालिक जो इस वक्त अमन के लिए बातचीत, पीस के लिए टॉक्स हो रही हैं, क्या वो सिर्फ और सिर्फ एक बयानिया बनाने की कोशिश की जा रही है? क्योंकि जो पब्लिक को दिखाया जा रहा है और जो अंदर हो रहा है, दोनों दो मुख्तलिफ चीजें हैं। और हमारे पास इस वक्त एरिक स्पर्लिंग मौजूद हैं जो कि अमेरिका की फॉरेन पॉलिसी के एक्सपर्ट हैं, अमेरिका की हुकूमत को और उनके जो इस वक्त हुक्मरान है उनको, जो राजनीति करते हैं, उन लोगों को वो मशवरा देते हैं कि किस तरह चलना चाहिए, किस तरह नहीं चलना चाहिए। साउथ एशिया को भी अच्छे तरीके से जानते हैं। तो सवाल ये है कि अंदर खाते क्या चल रहा है, जो दिखाया जा रहा है वो तो मुझे आपको पता है। Eric, the question is that what is actually going on behind the scenes? What is your analysis and what is your information? What's going on behind the closed doors? Because what we are seeing is only the competing narrative, an illegitimate regime trying to gain legitimacy through the peace talks. But what is actually going on? Ho kya raha hai? Eric, please.
Yeah, no, I'll try to be succinct because you're doing this impressive translation interpretation thing. But on the U.S. side, they saw that Iran had a much more impressive military response than expected. Iran's ability to close down the strait, to maintain its missile and drones was beyond what it was expected. Just today, NBC News reported that the bases, the damage to U.S. bases in the Gulf was way more than has been publicly acknowledged. So that's the dynamic that people are dealing with and that are confronting. I don't know if you want to translate that or if I should just go on my full thing and then you can go from there. Should I continue? Do you want me to? Do you want to translate that, or should I give the whole response?
Please continue. I'll give the crux. मैं अरब की बात का जो मजमू है वो आपको बताऊंगा. I'll give the crux of your talk in a few words to the audience. And we've already got, by the way, 2,000 plus people tuned in. I can see that. I'm sure you can also on the various platforms. We are going live on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitch.tv, X, Odyssey, and YouTube, of course. So we've got 2,000 plus, and TikTok. Don't forget TikTok. Yeah. So today somebody said that we've got a TikTok star amongst us. Well, I'm not a TikTok star at all, but we've got the point is that we've got 2,000 plus people over here. तो जो एरिक बात करेंगे जी, मैं उसका मजमुआ आपको बता दूंगा. और एरिक से मेरा सवाल ये है कि बंद दरवाजे के पीछे क्या कहानी चल रही है. Please continue, Eric.
Yeah, so Iran's response and their ability to maintain their missile and drone threat has been what everyone's trying to react to, and DC has been scrambling to figure out what to do, and what they've settled on is to impose the oil blockade on Iran, and then try to outlast Iran's economy. So, in other words, reduce the impact to the Western economies as much as possible, and increase the impact on the Iranian economy with the blockade. And the way that they're reducing that impact on the U.S. economy is not just on the economy, but also on the narrative. And the way they've been doing that is by projecting that there are talks, that the war will come to an end soon. So yesterday, when Trump and them, when Araghchi announced he's going to do this regional visit, someone smart in the White House essentially said, let's say we're sending our people, then that the markets will react favorably going into the weekend. And then a bunch of the U.S. media played along very problematically, which is something I'm working on currently, dealing with all these very senior journalists who took the Trump administration's obvious bluff as if it was a real leak. But that's the play, is to bluff that talks are going, to bluff the war will end soon, while you're maintaining the blockade on Iran and hoping that increases the U.S. leverage over Iran.
तो बहुत जबरदस्त एरिक जो बात कर रहे हैं वही बात है जो हम इतने दिनों से कर रहे हैं कि इस वक्त अमेरिका जो है वो सौदा भी चाहता है, लेकिन वो खुद वीक नजर नहीं आना चाहता. ईरान के पास जवाबी मार का अब भी इस वक्त जो फौजी ताकत है, मिसाइल मारने की ताकत है, वो मौजूद है. और उसके साथ साथ अमेरिका जो है वो वीक नजर नहीं आना चाहता, सौदा भी करना चाहता है. सदर ट्रंप इसीलिए जो है वो बात करते हैं. पिछले 24 घंटों में उन्होंने कहा कि स्ट्रेट खुल गई है, स्ट्रेट बंद हो गई है, ब्लॉकेड हो गया है, ब्लॉकेड नहीं है, सैंक्शन लिफ्ट हो गई है. मतलब एक बात के ऊपर टिकते नहीं है. लेकिन उसमें जो मेन बात वही है जो एरिक स्पर्लिंग कह रहे हैं कि मार्केट खुलने से पहले अमेरिका का मीडिया भी मिल जाता है कि मार्केट को मैनिपुलेशन करने के लिए ये तमाम बातचीत की जा रही है. मतलब स्टीव विटकॉफ और जैरेड कुशनर का इन्होंने ऐलान किया कि वो जा रहे हैं अमन के लिए बात करने, लेकिन वो उस वक्त तक था जिस वक्त तक मार्केट जो है वो वीकेंड के ऊपर चली नहीं गई. वो जो ही मार्केट बंद हुई, इन्होंने कह दिया, क्योंकि उन्होंने जाना ही नहीं था, ईरान को पता है कि क्या कहानी कर रहे हैं, तो उन्होंने कहा जी अब वो नहीं जा रहे. तो ये मार्केट को मैनिपुलेट किया जा रहा है. और डेफिनेटली देयर आर कंफ्लिक्टिंग सिग्नल्स है. पब्लिक डिनायल वर्सेस बैक चैनल डिप्लोमेसी इज गोइंग ऑन. मिलिट्री टेंशन अभी भी इट इज स्टिल हाई. देयर इज नो de-escalation phase out as yet because जो अमेरिकन मिलिट्री मूवमेंट है, इट इज वेरी इंटेंसिव इवन राइट नाउ. स्ट्रेट ऑफ हॉर्मज इज स्टिल द प्रेशर पॉइंट फॉर ग्लोबल लेवरेज जो ईरान के पास है, जो कि अमेरिका खोलना चाहता है. एंड मार्केट्स की जो ऊपर उतार चढ़ाव है, द मार्केट्स आर रिएक्टिंग टू द क्लोजर of Strait of Hormuz and the announcements of President Trump, and whatsoever is President Trump is saying is it looks directed towards the alleged, I'm saying alleged, market manipulation. The BBC has reported it, even the American media, CNN is reported it. हर कोई पूरी दुनिया में बात कर रहा है कि यार ये तो $1 billion कमा रहे हैं मार्केट मैनिपुलेशन के जरिए. तो एरिक से अगला सवाल ये पूछते हैं कि यार इतना आसान क्यों है? एरिक, why is it so easy for the Trump camp to carry out this alleged market manipulation and make billions in the process? Why do you think it's so easy?
Yeah, and I don't have personal knowledge of how who's making the billions. It appears somebody is. I think that's clear. I don't know who it is, but there's a few reasons it's easy. Number one is that Trump is very erratic, and so it's very easy for the media to believe that he's making a sudden shift. I think it's the nature of the media today. Obviously, media is under a lot of pressure in a lot of countries, and people are very desperate to report breaking news. And so I think it makes it very easy for people to, there's a real reality, he is a reality TV star. And so there is a reality TV component to kind of for-profit media globally. So that's another reason. And then finally, I think perhaps the part that is the biggest issue for us is that there's just a lack of awareness of the dynamics and the state of play of the conflict and kind of what the relative, what the strategies of each party is right now. And so, when people don't have that awareness of the strategy, then the journalists are very, they're very susceptible to falling victim to playing into that strategy, which is what happened yesterday and up until just now, and even maybe still happening a bit because Trump is pretending that he's calling the talks off. Well, anyone who's following this knows Iran said they weren't going to talk until the blockade was lifted. And there was no reason they were going to change that view. There was no theoretical reason they would change the view. It was absolutely they're going to be their view, and both parties are trying to wait to let the relative economic, impact, to let the economic impact of each of their strategies bite. And so that's I think those are probably the three reasons I've come up with for why the media keeps falling for this.
तो एरिक ने बड़ी जबरदस्त बात की. उन्होंने कहा मीडिया बार बार एक तो प्रेशर के अंदर है ब्रेकिंग न्यूज बनाने की, दूसरा एरिक ये कह रहे हैं कि बिलियंस ऑफ डॉलर तो लोग बना रहे हैं, कोई शक नहीं है, लेकिन कौन बना रहा है ही डजंट नो कि कौन बना रहा है, एंड वी रिस्पेक्ट दैट पोजीशन. लेकिन जो असल कहानी जो एरिक ने कही है वो कही है कि यहाँ पे ट्रंप ऐलान तो बड़े जबरदस्त कर रहा है, लगता है कि ऐलान टोटल कंट्रोल ट्रंप के पास है, लेकिन कंट्रोल यहाँ पे तमाम लोगों को पता है कि ईरान के पास है, कि ईरान इस वक्त जो है वो ऊपर वाली टांग इस वक्त ईरान की है. तो there are coming to the peace talks, conflicting signals are coming out now. Public denial is going on, and then there is a backdoor diplomacy. Military tension abhi bhi high hai. Strait of Hormuz is still closed. Ab this doesn't look like a peace process, it looks like negotiation under प्रेशर. ये पीस प्रोसेस कम और प्रेशर डिप्लोमेसी ज्यादा लगता है. तो एरिक से पूछते हैं कि यूएस के अमेरिका के पॉलिसी लेंस से क्या ये वाकई डिप्लोमेसी हो रही है या स्ट्रेटेजिक सिग्नलिंग हो रही है? एरिक, फ्रॉम द यूएस पॉलिसी लेंस, इज दिस रियल डिप्लोमेसी और स्ट्रेटेजिक सिग्नलिंग?
Diplomacy is on a pause right now. Right now, Iran has signaled that they're not going to negotiate during the blockade. There's reasons why. The reason they wouldn't want to do that is because if they begin negotiations under the blockade, then the U.S. will get relief from their economic situation. Oil futures will come down. The market will increase on the signal that talks are ongoing. But for as long as the blockade is taking place, Iran will continue to take an economic hit from that U.S. blockade on Iran. So again, that is a reason why nobody who's following this would think that Iran could ever agree to talks while the blockade is going on, because every minute that those talks go on, Iran is relatively weaker. And so therefore, the U.S. would simply have to say, find any excuse, say, oh, well, we need to get lunch. Every you get lunch, your leverage increases. You go to sleep, your leverage increases. So that's why no one who's following this would ever think that Iran would negotiate while the blockade is active. And we hope U.S. journalists, and as an advocacy organization, we're working to educate journalists a bit on this, would try to understand these elementary dynamics so that they're not misrepresenting the state of play as they report on it.
तो एरिक कह रहे हैं कि यार जब तक ये ब्लॉकेट जो है स्ट्रेट ऑफ हॉर्मज़ का अमेरिका करेगा, उस वक्त तक ईरान बात नहीं करेगा. ये बात सीधी सी है और ये पता नहीं क्यों नहीं इन लोगों को समझ आ रही. अगर ये बात समझ जाए तो मामला आसान हो जाएगा. अब कमिंग टू द की एंगल्स, व्हाट यूएस वांट्स इज डी-एस्केलेशन विदाउट अपीयरिंग वीक. अमेरिका चाहता है कि कमजोर नजर ना आए और डी-एस्केलेशन हो जाए. अ डील दैट लुक्स अ विन डोमेस्टिकली. बेसिकली ट्रंप के मिड टर्म आने वाले हैं और उसको अमेरिका के अंदर ये दिखाना है कि मैं जीता हूं. Trump's style of negotiation is pressure, chaos, last minute deal. Trump pressure डालता है, तबाही बर्बादी क्रिएट करता है और फिर लास्ट मिनट के ऊपर डील कर देता है. अब Trump's model has always been create maximum pressure, then negotiate from dominance. But Iran is not a typical player. ट्रंप का मॉडल हमेशा से ये रहा है कि पहले प्रेशर क्रिएट करो फिर डील करो, लेकिन ईरान कोई आम प्लेयर नहीं है. और अब हम पूछेंगे एरिक से कि क्या अमेरिका इस प्रोसेस को कंट्रोल कर रहा है या ईरान को सिर्फ अपना रिएक्शन दे रहा है? सो एरिक, इज द यूएस कंट्रोलिंग दिस प्रोसेस, सो कॉल्ड पीस प्रोसेस, और जस्ट रिएक्टिंग टू ईरान? व्हाट डू यू से?
Well, first of all, there's different actors in the U.S. space. I think you have, the more traditional folks who your audience may know, the people who are essentially, behind kind of the current neo-colonial relationship between the U.S. and Pakistan. People like Donald Liu and now Marco Rubio, those type of longtime State Department bureaucrats, they have their approach. Trump is obviously much more erratic and hard to know exactly what's going on in his mind. Though at this particular moment, his interests he appears to think his interests are aligned with those same people, which is why, he appears to be going along with the strategy of do the oil blockade on Iran, try to hold out as long as you can politically, in hopes that Iran will have some of these downsides that could, in theory, come from this oil blockade. And it appears there are some. I mean, Iran has a lot of leverage. It's, probably the most leverage, I think, of any U.S. adversary in history, probably. I think it's up there. It's one of the biggest in history. Vietnam never had a tiny, never had a fraction of this ability to influence the global economy that Iran has right now. So, so obviously the U.S. is not in control, and it will largely come down to Trump's appetite it may come down to Trump's appetite for destroying the Republican Party in the midterms, essentially.
तो एरिक ये बात मानते हैं कि अमेरिका जो है वो इस प्रोसेस को कंट्रोल नहीं कर रहा, बल्कि सिर्फ ईरान के जवाब के अंदर जो है वो हरकत कर रहा है. ईरान यहाँ पे कंट्रोल में अगर नहीं भी है तो अमेरिका को एरिक कहते हैं कि आज दिन तक कोई ऐसा जो है वो टकरा ही नहीं है सिरे से. अमेरिका को ऐसा जो है वो रकीब नहीं टकरा जिसके पास ये कुव्वत हो कि वे पूरी दुनिया की मईशत के ऊपर असरअंदाज हो सके. सो ईरान्स एबिलिटी टू इम्पैक्ट द ग्लोबल इकोनॉमी, ये इसमें एक मेजर किरदार है. बट कमिंग टू ईरान की पोजीशन के ऊपर बात करते हैं. द की पॉइंट्स इन ईरान इज के ईरान डिनाइज डायरेक्ट टॉक्स एंड मेंटेन्स स्ट्रेंथ इमेज. ईरान कहता है हमने डायरेक्ट बात नहीं करनी, तो इसका मतलब है ईरान कह रहा है कि ऐसी पुत्र साढ़े कोल कंट्रोल है. Then Iran uses regional leverages, Hormuz, proxies which can block Bab al-Mandab as well, the Red Sea corridor, and alliances throughout Middle East. Iran जो है वो अपने इत्तेहाद को, proxy network को, Hormuz को, Bab al-Mandab को, हूती हैं, उन सबको इस्तेमाल कर रहा है. And they are not rushing to a deal. मतलब ये दस्ती नहीं जाना चाह रहे. अमेरिका को जल्दी है, ईरान को जल्दी नहीं है. Iran is playing a long game. They are negotiating, but on their own terms. Not Washington's timeline. ईरान जल्दी में नहीं है, वो अपनी टर्म्स के ऊपर गेम खेल रहा है और अमेरिका के टाइमलाइन के ऊपर नहीं चल रहा. तो हम एरिक से पूछेंगे कि ये ईरान क्या बयानिया जो है, नैरेटिव जो है, वो इस वक्त नैरेटिव की जंग भी चल रही है, क्या वो जीत रहा है? एरिक, then in this context, is Iran winning the narrative war right now?
Well, globally, my sense is they're winning that narrative war. In the U.S., they're still not totally winning the narrative. I mean, they're winning it, obviously, relative to any other moment in recent U.S. history. I mean, we saw polls, that huge percentages of Americans don't care if there's even a nuclear deal. They just want the U.S. to get out now. This was kind of shocking numbers. The polls found that that strong majority of Kamala voters said, just get out. No nuclear deal needed. So we're in a new phase. People just aren't really buying the idea. And if you live in America, which maybe many of your viewers may have visited, or, nobody here cares about Iran. I mean, it's a tiny fraction. It's an elite obsession, so that's, I think, in that sense, Iran is winning. But in terms of the media narrative with journalists, they're still failing to, they're still not really explaining fully their, kind of they lost, for example, this recent push, I think, with the bluff that the Trump administration did. I think that was harmful. But hopefully this will be the last time that if the administration signals talks that aren't happening to calm the markets, I would think that Iran will be more prepared for that and say there's no talks, because Iran, needs the U.S. market to continue to have the impact. And so, we'll see what happens. I think they sort of lost this last round, but it may be the last time they lose one of these bluffs.
एरिक कहते हैं कि दुनिया के आलमी हिसाब किताब से तो बयानिए की जंग जो है ईरान जीत रहा है, लेकिन अमेरिका के अंदर ईरान कतई तौर के ऊपर बयानिए की जंग नहीं जीत रहा. वो तो बात समझ भी आती है. But coming to the Pakistan's role in this critical role and controversial role, पाकिस्तान का जो यहाँ पे है, the key angles of this role is कि Pakistan is positioning itself as a mediator. पाकिस्तान अपने आप को ग्लोबल पीस मेकर कहता है और सालिस के रोल के ऊपर जो है वो सामने खड़ा हुआ है. बट द रियलिटी इज दैट पाकिस्तान इज सीकिंग इंटरनेशनल लेजिटिमेसी. और हकीकत ये है कि पाकिस्तान को सिर्फ और सिर्फ जो है एक फॉर्म 47 हुकूमत को जो है वो लेजिटिमेसी चाहिए. एंड पाकिस्तान मिलिट्री एस्टैब्लिशमेंट इज प्रोजेक्टिंग रेलेवेंस. और पाकिस्तान की फौजी एस्टैब्लिशमेंट एक आईनी किरदार ढूंढ रही है 28वीं तरमीम के जरिए. तो इज दिस मीडिएशन रोल is it genuine diplomacy or a PR exercise for legitimacy? क्या ये जो mediation या global peacemaker का किरदार है ये वाकई हकीकी तौर के ऊपर एक डिप्लोमेसी है या सिर्फ और सिर्फ legitimacy हासिल करने का ड्रामा है? हम जो इस वक्त पूछेंगे इसके अंदर एरिक से भी कि is रावलपिंडी trying to sell influence is it doesn't actually have, ये क्या रावलपिंडी के पास इतनी तपड़ है भी ये, या अपनी जरूरत से ज्यादा बड़ी छलांग मार गया मुनीरा मिस्त्री? So ये हम पूछेंगे. Eric, do you think is Rawalpindi, the Pakistani military establishment, trying to sell influence it doesn't actually have over Iran? Like, for example, previously the Pakistani military dictator told President Trump that he will get him the Bagram air base in Afghanistan. He failed to do that, and now he said he's going to get him a favorable deal with Iran, and so far he's failed. So do you believe that he's trying to sell influence he simply does not possess?
Well, I think they're trying to sell that to the world. I don't know that, I don't know that the U.S., like the senior decision makers in the U.S. are really confused about that. I think, the Marco Rubios and the Asim Munirs, who are both, these are both far-right, hawkish figures. And they have the same interest in propping up this Pakistani regime that is serving U.S. Regional interests and Israeli interests.
What's Marco Rubio's interest in here?
So his interest is that he really doesn't want a leader. There's a few things he could want less in the world than a leader like Imran Khan, who's independent and aligning with, he never aligned with Russia and China at all. But he wasn't aligned with the U.S. against them. And that's enough for the U.S. If you are a country as big as Pakistan, has as much potential as Pakistan has, and you show openness to an independent foreign policy, that's essentially the same as being an enemy in the eyes of Marco Rubio, who is a hardcore Cold Warrior. His life's work essentially is to oppose Russia and China and try to destroy them at all costs. So all that to say is, so in that sense, Marco Rubio and those who support the Pakistani regime in Washington, which is essentially the entire national security elite, they have the same interests as Asim Munir here. And so they're all working together. So I think there's three options. One is, it's genuine diplomacy. Asim Munir is just a great champion for peace. He's never shown any evidence of that at any other moment in his life, but suddenly this is what he's doing. That's one option. The other option is he's bluffing, misrepresenting, and doing it solely for his own, presence on the international stage. And then the third option is that there's a sort of an understanding with the United States that they are working together to essentially undermine Iran by presenting themselves as a mediator, but actually working with the U.S. intelligence and national security elites. And I think it's probably a mix of the second two, is my sense.
तो एरिक स्पर्लिंग ने बड़ी जबरदस्त तरीके से ये बात बताई कि वजह जो है वो यहाँ पे जो नेशनल सिक्योरिटी एस्टैब्लिशमेंट जिनको बोलते हैं, जिनको पहले डीप स्टेट भी बोला करते थे अमेरिका के अंदर, वो आसिम मुनीर को इसलिए सपोर्ट कर रही है कि वो इमरान खान से उनकी जान जाती है कि इमरान खान जो है वो पाकिस्तान की अवाम का जो मुंतखब लीडर है वो पाकिस्तान के, जाहिर बात है, कौमी मफाद के अंदर काम करेगा और अमेरिका की डिक्टेशन नहीं लेता। आसिम मुनीर उनका नौकर है, इसलिए वो उसको प्रॉप आउट तो कर रहे हैं, लेकिन ये बात अभी तक इन्होंने नहीं बताई। एरिक, you simply so far, do you personally really believe that Asim Munir has got the kind of influence he's trying to sell or he's trying to project in Iran or in the region even?
Well, in this case, it's not even about influence because it's a very challenging negotiation. And I think in this case, it would be a lot more about skill, and actual skill and intelligence, understanding the perspectives of each party, and then creatively navigating those and bridging those, and then using your own gravitas, if you have any, right, in theory, to help kind of lock in or help build trust, to kind of usher the parties towards that trusting place. He couldn't, I mean, I'm not an expert on the man's psychology. I have a basic understanding of his history. He's not even in the universe. He's not even within a light year having that level of skill or capacity, even if his intentions were good, which there's very little indication his intentions are good. So it's just the worst case scenario. And I think anyone who really wants to see a diplomatic deal here, such as Americans, all of us, the polls show everyone wants a deal. Nobody in America wants this war. So for those of us who want a deal, the idea that he would be involved as a mediator is essentially horrifying. I mean, it couldn't be a worse person.
तो एरिक कहते हैं कि मसला ये नहीं है कि इन्फ्लुएंस है, इन्फ्लुएंस तो इसके पास कोई नहीं है, लेकिन सादा अल्फाज में कहा है कि मसला ये है कि क्या वो ये सौदा करा सकता है। लेकिन वो कह रहे हैं कि जिन भी लोग जिससे भी अमेरिका में बात करो वो समझते हैं लल्ला है, ये लल्ला जो है सौदा कोई नहीं करवा सकता, इसकी औकात नहीं है सौदा करवाने की। तो फिर यहाँ पे बहुत बड़े बड़े रिस्क इन्वॉल्व हैं, देयर आर सीरियस रिस्क इन्वॉल्व नाउ under the circumstances, and the biggest risk is miscalculation. The miscalculation risk is high. That is what we were talking about कि यार ये जो इतनी बड़ी बड़ी बढ़ के मार रहा है मुनीरा मिस्त्री, और ग्राउंड पे सिचुएशन इतनी ज्यादा रिस्की है, पूरी दुनिया जो है वो ऑन द एज है, तो रिस्क हाई है। Strait of Hormuz escalation vis-a-vis the global economic shock, that is the key risk over here, and proxy escalation could derail the talks. जो इस वक्त अगर ईरान की जगह आप देखें कि अगर ईरान जो है वो मान भी जाता है, लेकिन लेबनान में प्रॉक्सी है, यमन में प्रॉक्सी है, पूरी के पूरे मिडिल ईस्ट के अंदर जो है उनका प्रॉक्सी भी मौजूद है। सेंटिमेंट पाकिस्तान के अंदर भी बड़ा स्ट्रॉन्ग सेंटिमेंट है, इसीलिए न्यूयॉर्क टाइम्स से मेन आर्टिकल खत्म कर दिया गया। द बिगेस्ट डेंजर राइट नाउ इज नॉट वॉर बाय डिजाइन but war by miscalculation. सबसे बड़ा खतरा जो यहां पे है वो ये नहीं है कि जंग जो है वो शुरू हो जाएगी, बल्कि miscalculation की वजह से जंग शुरू हो जाएगी। And that is what Eric is saying, that Eric is saying that it is a lot is at stake. और एरिक ये कह रहा है कि जिस बंदे को पता चलता है कि यार ये मुनीरे मिस्री के सर के ऊपर सारा काम हो रहा है, तो उसकी जान निकल जाती है। So Eric is saying that the people get horrified to just imagine that this guy who's the illegitimate lead, usurper of a country, seeking legitimacy through these talks, is spearheading the process. So it's a high risk game. But talking about the possible outcomes, इसका अब नतीजा क्या निकलेगा उसके ऊपर आ जाए। Either managed de-escalation यहाँ पे हो सकती है, 3 सिनेरियो डिस्कस करते हैं। Let's discuss the outcome of this entire process. There can be 3 outcomes in my mind. The first is managed de-escalation, quiet deal, face-saving narrative, खामोशी के साथ बंद दरवाजे के पीछे सौदा हो जाए। Second scenario is prolonged tension, which is most likely, लंबा चलेगा काम, सबसे ज्यादा ये बात है। बातचीत होती रहेगी, प्रेशर रहेगा, the talks continue, pressure stays, all right? And third is sudden escalation. This is the worst case scenario. दस्ती कोई ना कोई पुट्ठा काम होता है और रोला पड़ जाता है, ट्रिगर इंसिडेंट होता है, रैपिड कॉन्फ्लिक्ट होता है। This can happen. We are not looking at a clean resolution. We are looking at a managed crisis. So what do you have to say, Eric? आप क्या कहते हैं इस पे, Eric?
Yeah, well, I think everybody on all sides is waiting to see, who tolerates the current economic restrictions more effectively. And so the question is, on one side, you obviously have the oil blockade against Iran. How does Iran adjust to that? Are they able to get their oil out? Do they have issues with, all these various issues we could go into? But, we certainly saw Pezeshkian today was talking to the Iranian people about, essentially limiting some of their economic activity. So it clearly has an impact. And on the other hand, you have the U.S. and the West. You have the real oil supply shock for their allies. And then the pressure that puts on the U.S. to make a deal. And then the pressure, of course, that puts on Trump and the Republican Party for the midterms. And so that's really the debate. And so I think it's going to essentially stay in this state until it starts to become clearer which side is struggling more with the economic impact of the other side's strategy. And that, I think it's unclear how long that will take. I mean, I'm not an expert in this oil supply shock. I've read a lot of different things, but it's possible that we start to see that shock hit and create a very acute crisis very shortly. It's also possible we start seeing major deterioration in the Iranian economy. These are unknowable things. None of this has ever happened before, but that's what I think both sides are waiting to analyze and then reassess their position from there.
Very interesting that, nobody is actually controlling the process. So is it fair to say that nobody is actually controlling the process? And in fact, the process is controlling various parties then. And nobody is actually controlling the circumstances, but the circumstances are controlling various warring factions over here. So what is the possible outcome? Well, you cannot predict that. But मैं आप लोगों से पूछता हूँ, आप बताएं, पीस होगी या एस्केलेशन होगा? आपका क्या ख्याल है? कौन सी which country are you watching this from? Please do comment. And do you trust US intentions or Iran's stance? आपको क्या अमेरिका की जो इसके ऊपर जो बातचीत है उस पर एतबार है या ईरान का जो नजरिया है उसके ऊपर एतबार है? आप क्या समझते हैं? अमन होगा या टेंशन बरकरार रहेगी? और एरिक से अगर आप कोई सवाल पूछना चाहते हैं तो कमेंट्स के अंदर बताइए, मैं जरूर सवाल पूछूंगा। और जाहिर बात है कि दिस isn't just about Iran and the US. This is about global power balance, energy routes, and who controls the narrative of peace. ये सिर्फ ईरान और अमेरिका का मसला नहीं है, ये पूरी दुनिया का आलमी पावर का जो बैलेंस है इस वक्त, वो और जो बयानिए का कंट्रोल है, ये उसकी जंग इस वक्त चल रही है। और अगर जाहिर बात है कि इसको देखा जाए तो इस वक्त जंग ये एक इसके बाद जो सबसे बड़ी बात है कि जो पाकिस्तान में बात होती है कि चाइना के रोल पे कोई बात नहीं करता, हालांकि चाइना इस जंग में कलीदी किरदार अदा कर रहा है, कंट्रोल का किरदार, मरकजी किरदार अदा कर रहा है। आसिम मुनीर के बारे में भी कहा जाता है कि अमेरिका को जो भी कर रहा है उनका फेवरेट फील्ड मार्शल होगा, लेकिन असल में वो चाइना की बात जो है वो मान रहा है। इस पे एरिक से बात पूछते हैं। एरिक, there is the biggest player behind the scenes, who's pulling the strings is most definitely Beijing, but nobody talks much about it. What do you have to say to that?
I'm sorry, you said who is behind the strings?
The biggest player behind the scenes pulling the string is Beijing, who's got influence in West Asia.
Yes.
And nobody talks much about them.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not clear to what extent, they played a role. I mean, I think there's been some concerns I've heard from some Pakistani analysts who I respect as well, who have said that it's possible Beijing encouraged Iran, really the driving force behind pushing Iran to engage with Pakistan. I could see that being possible. That would be, unfortunate in my view if that were the case. And you would hope that they could see that the way this played out was not in the interest of Iran's kind of negotiating position ultimately. But I don't see them pulling the strings. I see them more sitting back and reaping the benefits of you see a U.S. that is just completely out of control. I think in the global hearts and minds battle, I don't think anyone comes out of this war, thinking, wow, really, the U.S. is really a beacon of freedom, and Iran is a real evildoer. I mean, I just don't think that's really what people are thinking worldwide. I think everyone knows it's a Trump Netanyahu out of control, very dark moment for the world because of a couple of the most sick leaders, in post-World War II history. So, yeah, so I don't see Beijing's pulling the strings. I see them as kind of calmly sitting back, reaping the benefits. And that's not just my view. I mean, this is the view of everyone in Washington, whether people who hate China, want to destroy China, people who are open to China. Everyone agrees China's reaping the benefits from this disastrous war.
एरिक ने बड़ी सीधी बात की, हमने कहा ये नेतन्याहू और ट्रंप ने गेम शुरू की है और चाइना खामोशी से पीछे मजे कर रहा है और वो इसके जो है वो बेनिफिशियरी है चाइना, यहाँ पे वो सुकून कर रहा है बिल्कुल. एरिक, द question from the audience is Ursel Beg has asked the question, Eric, how would Europe handle this crisis on home front they're dealing on Ukraine? Would they go for Iran?
How will Europe handle the crisis
on the home front, because there's a Ukraine, there's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine as well, and it is in Europe's interest to support Ukraine, obviously. So how would the question, which is visible right now on the screen, is that how would Europe handle this crisis on home front? They're dealing on Ukraine. Would they go for Iran under the circumstances?
Yeah, no. Well, they're certainly not going to go for Iran in that sense. I mean, they are aligned with Israel, and that's been obviously something that we've seen during the entire Gaza genocide. It's been disgusting. For most of the European population, they find that sickening. The vast majority of Europeans are not big fans of Israel, though it is higher support than the rest of the world. But still, no. But Europe's big issue is their energy prices. The U.S. pressured them to ditch Russian energy, and that led to major economic impacts. So now have an additional oil gas price spike. The U.S. is just decimating Europe with its policy, and it's I think every analyst who's serious is shocked by how docile, how complacent Europe has been, and it's going to lead to an end to these mainstream parties in Europe, and they're going to lose, and that's scary. It's going to be scary for NATO. It's also going to be scary for a lot of immigrant populations in those countries. We've obviously seen the far right attacking Pakistani diaspora, for example. So it's just a nightmare. But I think the entire first world, if you will, so-called first world of U.S., Europe, the West, it's in crisis, and it's the sooner we balance out the world and reduce the amount of harm that the so-called West, NATO can do, in our view, the better for everybody.
So एरिक ने बड़ी सीधी सी बात की है कि यूरोप में पहले इतने ज्यादा रोले पड़े हुए हैं कि वो एक नया पंगा नहीं ले सकता ईरान के अंदर जाके, क्योंकि ये वो जीत नहीं सकते और वो इस वक्त जो है वो बयानिए की जंग हार रहे हैं. और इस वक्त जो सबसे बड़ा हर तरफ से सवाल आ रहा है वो मैं एरिक से पूछूंगा कि नवंबर में मिड टर्म आ रहे हैं. एरिक, द बिगेस्ट क्वेश्चन ऑन पीपल्स माइंड राइट नाउ इज दैट, एंड दे आर आस्किंग यू डायरेक्टली, दैट एरिक, हाउ फार कैन ट्रम्प ड्रैग दिस कॉन्फ्लिक्ट with midterms in November? And again, another question, please answer them both together. Mr. Sperling, what do you think about Mr. President is going to come out? Would he come out victorious in November or not? So could you please answer both of these questions together? It's about the midterm, November midterm. How far can he drag it on under the current circumstances? And what outcome, especially after the Virginia elections results are out, what kind of outcome in the domestic US politics you're looking at, or the fallout of this war you're looking at?
Yeah, well, I think it's pretty widely accepted that it's very little way that the Republicans could keep the House in November. That's actually good for those viewers who care about Pakistani democracy and human rights, because I think advocates are expecting that we'll be able to hold a number of historic votes to put pressure on the Pakistani regime in the House if Democrats retake it. But I think the question is there a possibility of the Democrats retaking the Senate? And that will ultimately come down to, how long can Trump use his statements to keep those economic narratives from building? I think now with him pretending to call off the talks that Iran never agreed to, I think most analysts, I'm sure, the futures markets, you look at the markets in the U.S., I assume they're going to be dropping and oil is going to be spiking. And so it's just all comes down to that perception of how likely oil supply is going to be how likely the impact is going to be and how great it's going to be. But it's not looking good. We'll have to see. I mean, it's hard to imagine he can hold out much longer, but he is very closely aligned with the most extreme pro-Israel billionaires. So he may decide, I care more about my ties to the pro-Israel billionaires in my retirement than I do about my reputation as a president and my legacy. Because ultimately, who's going to support him? Is his legacy going to support him? after he leaves office, or are those pro-Israel billionaires going to? So that might be the kind of thing he's thinking about.
तो एरिक ने बड़ी सीधी सी बात की है कि सदर ट्रंप जो है वो रिटायरमेंट के बाद जो इजराइल के हमायती जो बिलियनियर हैं उनके साथ उनके लिए काम कर रहे हैं, और इसमें कोई शक नहीं है कि इलेक्शन के नतीजे के अंदर ये हार जाएंगे, मिड टर्म के अंदर ये हारेंगे, और उनको इसकी परवाह नहीं है। उनको इस चीज की परवाह है कि वो जो इजराइल के हमायती जो बड़े बड़े दुनिया चलाने वाले जो बिलियनियर हैं वो उनकी सपोर्ट करना चाहते हैं, और रिटायरमेंट में उनके साथ जो है वो बेसिकली कारोबार कर रहे हैं। तो हारने का बहरहाल उनका पूरे का पूरा चांस है। और आप ज्यादातर पूछ रहे हैं इमरान खान के बारे में। एरिक से मैं पूछूं, एरिक इमरान खान की रिहाई के लिए एक्टिवली इन्वॉल्व भी हैं। एरिक, फाइनली there are a lot of questions about Imran Khan and what I know you've been doing a lot about for Imran Khan, for his release, for lobbying for him. So the question is that what people are asking is that what could be done in the USA after November, maybe in connection with lobbying for Imran Khan and in connection with restoration of democracy in Pakistan. And what efforts are you doing in that connection? And what efforts should the Pakistani diaspora, direct their energies towards? Please, if you could answer this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll try to summarize it. But the basic state of play is that, unfortunately, with Rubio's success at connecting Trump with his favorite field marshal, it's limited Republican interest was limited in the first place because Pakistan's regime is seen as a U.S. proxy. And so they're not really inclined to put pressure on their own proxy. That's just kind of how proxies work. That said, we had some hope. Unfortunately, Rubio has outmaneuvered Grenell, and Trump appears aligned with the field marshal, in addition to the Witkoff family money and so forth. All that to say is our strategy remains the same, and will be likely channeling through Democrats who will say we will need to be pushing for legislation that has teeth, that says the U.S. relationship with Pakistan will be limited and will be curtailed if Pakistan does not accomplish these basic tasks of democracy and human rights. This is as basic as it gets. The U.S. has done it many times. And so that's what we're going to be working towards, especially in this upcoming Congress, but we'll be setting the stage for that now, which is to say, the U.S. cannot continue to train the Pakistani military. The U.S. cannot send weapons to Pakistani military or give other support if Pakistan doesn't do the most basic democratic and human rights practices, such as releasing the most popular politician in the country, who also happens to be the most successful cricket player and a national hero for the country. Should probably release the leading person in the country. That's just pretty basic. And then, of course, to release all the other victims who are simply, what is their crime? They wanted a basic democratic system. That's the crime. So releasing those people that's what we'll be looking towards. And I think the diaspora in the U.S., they should, when they talk to their members of Congress, they should say, the members of Congress will say, I hear you, I'm with you. But we need the diaspora to say, okay, but are you going to support legislation that has teeth that will cut U.S. support if it doesn't change? And that's where everyone's focus should be going into the next months and years.
तो एरिक कह रहे हैं कि इमरान खान को अगर आपने आज़ाद करवाना है तो अमेरिका के अंदर खासतौर के ऊपर और बैनुल-अक़वामी दुनिया में भी ओवरसीज पाकिस्तानी जो है वो लेजिस्लेशन प्रमोट करवाएं, कवानीन बनवाएं कि पाकिस्तान की फौज को और डिक्टेटरशिप को सपोर्ट करने की बजाय हकीकी जमहूरियत को वहां पे सपोर्ट किया जाए। और अगर आप उनको इस प्रेशर डालेंगे और उस प्रेशर के तहत उनको सपोर्ट करेंगे या जो भी आप उनको डोनेशन वगैरह देते हैं वो करेंगे तो तभी मामलात जो हैं सुधरेंगे। नहीं तो नवंबर के बाद भी जो नौकर हैं उनके, जो इनकी बात मानते हैं, वन विंडो ऑपरेशन जिन्होंने इनको दिया हुआ है, ये तो उन्हीं को सपोर्ट करेंगे। तो आपको लॉन्ग टर्म गेम खेलनी है अगर, तो आप ने जो इलेक्शन आने वाला है उसके लिए आप काम करें और लेजिस्लेशन बनवाएं हमेशा के लिए, ताकि इसका मुस्तकिल इलाज हो। जिस तरह ये कह रहे हैं कि पाकिस्तान की फौज के ऊपर, ट्रेनिंग के ऊपर पाबंदी लगाई जाए अगर वो अपने आप को सियासत के अंदर इन्वॉल्व करते हैं तो। और इसके ऊपर एरिक भी काम कर रहे हैं और अमेरिकन पाकिस्तानी भी काम कर रहे हैं, लेकिन उनको इन्फिल्ट्रेट करने की भी मुसलसल कोशिश की जा रही है। और इस इन्फिल्ट्रेशन को रोकने के लिए क्या काम करना चाहिए वो मैं आपको अलहदा बताऊंगा। बट एरिक, बिफोर आई लेट यू गो, बिकॉज इट्स ऑलरेडी बीन ऑलमोस्ट एन आवर, there is a very interesting question coming up about, the Pakistanis have signed this defense deal with the Saudis, right? So in that context, do you see any direct or indirect conflict of Pakistan with Iran under circumstances of any possible attack on Arab land, especially Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, keeping in view this defense pact? This is the question for you, Mr. Arik, that comes from Ana Salim, and हम अरेक से पूछ रहे हैं कि क्या ईरान और पाकिस्तान की जंग हो सकती है अगर ईरान सऊदी अरब के ऊपर हमला करता है तो? Arik, could you please answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it gets to the stage where Iran is really aggressively striking Saudi oil facilities or energy, we've gotten close to reaching the point of no return for the conflict. And so I think the hope, and I think there's indications that, Trump knows that if it gets to that stage, Trump's presidency would essentially be over because the world will go into a global recession. So that, I think, is the main hope we have. But it is a huge problem to think that, Rawalpindi has this agreement with the Saudis and then is a mediator. It just is another reason why Iran should have never agreed, to have someone who has a defense pact with one of their enemies as a mediator. But I think it's hopefully unlikely. But we have to keep working. Those of us who are trying to end the war have to keep working to make sure it doesn't happen.
Eric तो कह रहा है कि मुश्किल ही है ये हो, but Eric, President Trump is trying to, manipulate the entire situation into a Shia-Sunni conflict, and he has publicly, made a post about it. The Shia Sunni Muslims are good and Shia are not good. So he's creating a sectarian divide, and he wants it to, obviously, it's quite obvious that he's not making any secret of it, that he wants a sectarian conflict in Middle East. In that context, do you think he would succeed, President Trump, he would succeed in doing that?
Well, I don't, it's hard to see it getting much worse than it is now. I mean, I think, again, if it gets any worse, it's going to be, I think it's going to be catastrophic for the world. So, I think it's all going to come down now to what I said, which is just, who buckles first economically and politically. Does Iran, a political and economic system, buckle first, or does the U.S. buckle first? And I think the fair reading is that it's extremely likely that the U.S. is going to buckle first. I think because it's the war is unbelievably unpopular, whereas Iranian society is going to be relatively united more than they have in recent years. I don't think he'll succeed at making the crisis any worse. I do think that, some of these Gulf regimes are going to have a challenging economic picture going forward. And that's going to be interesting as we emerge from this conflict.
अरे कह रहे हैं शिया सुन्नी मामला तो बात की बात है, बल्कि हो ही चुका है इस वक्त। जो इतने हालात खराब हैं, उससे ज्यादा क्या खराब होंगे? शिया सुन्नी वाला मामला ये खड़ा कर भी दे तो क्या फर्क पड़ जाना है, क्योंकि इतना ज्यादा पैड़ा हाल हो चुका है कि अमेरिका के अंदर भी और पूरी दुनिया के अंदर। और अब सवाल सिर्फ ये है कि कौन बकल फर्स्ट करता है, कौन पहले आंख झपकेगा। और एरिक अमेरिका के फॉरेन पॉलिसी एक्सपर्ट हैं, वो कह रहे हैं कि अमेरिका सबसे पहले जो है वो आंख झपकेगा। अमेरिका के अंदर जो है वो लगता है कि इतना जोर नहीं है कि वो इस मामलात को आगे खींच सके। और ये शिया सुन्नी वाला फसाद वो क्या कराएंगे? इससे बड़ा फसाद क्या हो सकता है जो पहले से यहाँ पे हो रहा है? तो एक इस वजह से जो है अब सिर्फ इट्स ओनली अ क्वेश्चन दैट हु इज गोइंग टू बकल फर्स्ट, or Eric thinks that the US would buckle first. What do you think? I would ask you in the comments. Then you can make your comments and please share the video. I'm irrespective of you guys sitting here. I can see there are 3,600 people watching this live stream. But even then, I think that these numbers are quite less because I am being reported massively by state-sponsored cells, and there's a shadow ban. So please do, share this video. Subscribe to the channel on which you're watching this, wherever you are, and so that the words may spread that peace is the logical way forward. And this is a very logical discussion, I believe, which is going on. We thank you, Eric, for joining in. Thank you so very much, all the viewers, for joining in. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया आपका. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks so much.